This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up this week, we discuss the dismissal of the Auditor General and conflicts of interest.
Certainly, I think the very appointment of two former ministers in a government which was investigated, particularly for the so-called golden passports, I think that was problematic right from the start. I think that set the whole tone. And you can see that, the heads of the legal service, they were behaving in ways which was somewhat protective of the previous governments, of the political establishment.
And on a lighter note, you're invited next weekend to a Dog's Day Out.
We will have dogs there that are available for adoption. They will also be there so people can socialize with them and see how much love that these animals have to give up.
The only story that we've been hearing in the last several days is, of course, the dismissal of Cyprus Auditor General Odysseas Michailidis. I'm going to talk about that this week. I didn't want to talk about it before because it's very touchy when you're talking about a decision of our Supreme Constitutional Court. But I'm joined from the University of Cyprus this week by Professor Charidimos Tsoukas. Charidimos, I know you've got a quite, I should say, strong take on this, and I think a lot of other people have. We've had demonstrations, we've had people accusing the Supreme Court judges of political decisions, but there is more to it than that, isn't there? Because I understand that actually they did follow the letter of the law. The big question is whether or not doing that actually was just. So what is your take on what's happened?
Well, thank you, Rosie. I think the very idea, the very notion of misconduct or improper behavior, because this is what Mr. Michailidis was charged with, is in itself inherently ambiguous. It requires interpretation. So you may have lots of facts, lots of things that you can use as evidence for or against someone, but all this requires interpretation. So my view is the interpretation the Supreme Court took of Mr. Michailidis' behavior was a conservative view. Maybe they stuck to the letter of the law, but they did not take the opportunity to more creatively approach the Auditor General's case, because I felt this was an opportunity for them to make new standards. So here you have a man who has really vigorated the Audit Commission, the Cyprus Audit Commission, literally. It has been enormously effective in the last 10 years in disclosing scandals, in protecting public funding, public finance, in setting new standards for what it means for an Auditor General to conduct investigations. And this has been broadly recognized by the public opinion. It's not accidental that his service, Audit Commission, has been held in such high esteem in the last 10 years. So against this background, you have a Supreme Court which focuses on particular public communications on the part of the General Auditor and a few other things, of course, to conclude that his was improper behavior or misconduct. Well, I think this is quite a leap in interpretation, actually. It does not accord with the public mood. Not that it has to, no, it doesn't, but that in itself is revealing that how come most of the people think that Mr. Michailidis was such an effective civil servant, whereas the Supreme Court takes a very opposite view. Of course, they did say that they did not look into the content of his decisions, but the manner in which they were made and how he expressed himself in public. But I don't think you can dissociate the two. And I'm afraid the Supreme Court did make that distinction between the two and narrowly focused on certain acts which I think prevented them from seeing the whole picture.
Well, I have read that the one-way decision, if you can call it that, was very carefully orchestrated by the way the Attorney General presented his case. Now, let's all be honest and say that Odysseas Michailidis was actually a bit of a loose cannon, wasn't he? You could say that a senior civil servant shouldn't take to Twitter and all the other social medias with some of the things he said, and there was undoubtedly a lot of waves between him and the Attorney General. But why is it that it's the Attorney General who can bring this case and push for the dismissal of one of his critics, and nobody seems to have thought about that?
Well, yes, clearly. I mean, yes, Michailidis was fearless. Maybe one can call him loose cannon, maybe. He was clearly fearless, not thinking twice before he went to Twitter or Facebook, so he was very active in his public communications. And in my articles for the Greek Cypriot press, I stressed these two additional dimensions that he gave to his role. One was this communicative activism, which we have never seen before, and also the other is what I might call institutional objections. He expressed objections to other agents, public agents and state officials when he thought they were not doing their jobs properly. These are entirely new things. So Michailidis was a surprise, absolute surprise in the Cypriot institutional structure. We have never come across a civil servant before who was so fearless and so ready to investigate cases, no matter who was involved, from the President of the Republic to a minor civil servant somewhere in the depths of the state apparatus. Yes, he was a critic of the Attorney General. In an ideal world, if we were living in the UK or in Sweden or Scandinavian countries where I think standards are higher than they are here, probably we wouldn't have seen that kind of shouting match between these two powerful operators. But here you are. You have an Attorney General who used to be a minister in the Anastasiadis government. Now he becomes an Attorney General. You have his deputy who was similarly a minister. So you have a duo at the top of the legal service with prior political baggage.
Well, that brings me, sorry to interrupt, that brings me to what I was going to ask you about conflicts of interest. Now, my understanding, do correct me if I'm wrong, is that in the Constitution it specifically says that the only person who could bring this sort of action to remove the Auditor General is the Attorney General and not the President, presumably because if he appointed the Auditor General, then he has a conflict of interest. But as you mentioned, both the Attorney General and his deputy both served in the Anastasiadis government, which was very much investigated by the audit service. And so you could say very clearly that surely the Attorney General and his deputy should have declared conflict of interest, however angry they were with what was coming out in the press.
Probably, and certainly, I think the very appointment of two former ministers in a government which was investigated, particularly for the so-called golden passports, I think that was problematic right from the start. I think that set the whole tone, if you like, of the conflict. And you can see that, the heads of the legal service, they were behaving in ways which was somewhat protective of the previous governments or of the political establishment. And that's, I think, what infuriated Michailidis to a large extent. And he was insistent on pointing out the obstacles that the legal service were presenting him in doing his work. So he wanted, for example, to get data evidence from the Minister of Defense about certain soldiers who were allegedly they were serving in favorable conditions, and that was not proper, that was not legal, and the Ministry of Defense would refuse to supply him with that evidence. So, and the Attorney General wouldn't do anything to allow access to that evidence. So incidents like this, they do highlight that the Attorney General was acting as if he wanted to somehow protect certain pillars of the Cypriot establishment. And that's not good. This is...
They're supposed to be independent officials, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. The law is clear on this, that the audit service ought to be given unobstructed access to all data that they request in doing their jobs. Well, that was not the case, as we know. And with a passport case, it took them a year to obtain access. In the case of the Minister of Defense, they were never given access. No, that raises certain questions. Clearly, Michailidis was a pain in the neck for being so insistent, and he would persevere, and he would go public. And I think what ultimately, if you ask me, what made the difference was his communication activism. That he did not confine himself to simply sending internal memos and notes to the Attorney General, but he wanted the public to know about these things. That's entirely new in the Cyprus reality, and I think this is ultimately costed him his job.
Yeah, well, it's a bit refreshing for a change in Cyprus instead of trying to sneak looks under the carpet. But that brings me to our president. Now, let's talk about his role in this, because surely if he really was as committed as he says he is to fighting corruption and scandals, he should have taken these two people together to his office and tried to sort out their differences. And he didn't, as far as we know.
I'm afraid so. I think the president has been a reluctant player in all this. Some people called him a Pontius Pilate, washing his hands, as it were. I think he could and should have played a more active role in sorting out the difference. I can see how constrained he may have been, though, because don't forget that he was a member of the Nicosia government before. So
we come back to that conflict of interest which seems to permeate this government and the previous one.
Yes. It is. In Cyprus, I'm afraid, the notion of conflict of interest is not well embedded in the public mentality, nor in institutional memory. That in itself has been pointed out several times by the former Attorney General, Mr. Cleridis, by the former General Auditor, Mr. Michailidis, and other officials. That is a real issue. You have a former president, for example, who doesn't see Mr. Anastasiadis, who travels to Seychelles, and at the expense of one of his rich Saudi Arabian friends, and he doesn't perceive any likely conflict of interest. You have now we know for a fact it was in the report by the Nicosia Commission, which investigated the golden passports, that ministers who used to be lawyers in their previous life, their legal offices, they handled passport cases while they were being members of the government. Now, this is extraordinary. It is written down in the Nicosia report, and we haven't seen any action taken. This is pointed out in several international reports by the European Union on the state of the rule of law in Cyprus and so on. So it is a big issue, I'm afraid, and it comes from the top. We haven't seen exemplary behavior from the top, and to indicate how serious conflict of interest is. And I think this is what we're paying the cost for this now.
What about the fact that, as far as I know, the judges at that Supreme Constitutional Court did not have in their toolkit, if you like, the option of doing anything else like a reprimand to Mr. Michailidis about his public behaviour, for example, and the only option they had was dismissal?
Yes, to be fair to them, I'm not a legal scholar, but to be fair to them, they did not have any other option. It was a binary decision. Either they find the official guilty of misconduct or not guilty. There is nothing in between. That's an issue, I think, but it has nothing to do with the Supreme Court. It's a broader issue. Should there be cases where an official is accountable, may be reprimanded for certain acts of behavior without nullifying his or her entire work. Should there be more nuances in this? Yeah, I think it's a governance issue. Also, the audit there must be in the legal system as well as in the way the audit service operates. There must be checks and balances whereby an official, if he is perceived to be too harsh, if you like, in his public comments, then there must be ways of reining him in. But we don't have that kind of system right now. So the Supreme Court were faced with this task, whether they find Mr. Michailidis guilty of misconduct or not. And that was the decision they had to make.
Where does this leave us, Haridimos? I mean, what comes next? We have a new Auditor General. I don't know much about him. I wonder how the Audit Office is now going to conduct its work, because there's no doubt at all that Michailidis did change the way it worked, and instead of one visit to the presidential palace every year, I think it was in December, with an enormous folder of all their work of the year, which I'm sure hardly anybody bothered to read through anyway. We had him coming regularly and also, as you said, making public the things that they were investigating, which nobody would have had any idea about if he hadn't done it that way.
Yes, I can tell you anecdotally, I know some people in the audit service, and they are dispirited, enormously dispirited. And I can understand this. We know this from research, that when the head of an agency is removed in the way Mr. Michailidis was, then morale drops in the service. So I would expect the morale in the audit service to be pretty low. Also, I would
Sorry, will that
also
impact the way they do their job, do you think?
Well, it's not so much. I think they will, to some extent, when morale drops, inevitably people will slow down a bit. They will not necessarily give their best selves. But the more important thing will be, I think, from the second point, which is the new Auditor General. He, I'm sure, as other public officials will be, he will be far more reluctant to exert their initiative, to take action and do investigations which will be outside the very, very narrow confines of their role. That's what distinguished Mr. Michailidis. He did not think of his role in very narrow technical terms. He, for example, let me give an example. I listened to Mrs. Haralabidou, the Member of Parliament, the other day, and she was, maybe still is, the chairperson of the Control Committee of Parliament, and she told us that the second trip of Mr. Anastasiadis to Seychelles took place, and he was asked about it. He denied it. But Mr. Michailidis investigated this by looking at the bonuses of his staff, and he was able to establish that there was indeed a trip that took place. That kind of initiative, that kind of detective-like spirit, if you like, whereby I'm not going to rest the case simply because an official reassures me they haven't done anything, but I will rather take it to its logical conclusions, I want to explore it deeper. That kind of initiative, I doubt very, very strongly whether the new Auditor General will have it or whether any other public official will have it. Because the message they got from the Supreme Court is, stick to your knitting, stick to the narrow confines of your role. Don't do anything beyond that. By analogy, by way of analogy, it's what people call in medicine defensive medicine. Is going to a doctor, and the doctor, rather than taking some risks in exploring cases which may out of the ordinary, does what is minimally required because he does not want to be accused of any kind of improper conduct. So this is what we're going to see to a large extent throughout the civil service in Cyprus, and that's a really bad thing.
Let me ask your opinion about whether or not all of this brings to mind the fact that perhaps when Auditor Generals and Attorney Generals and their deputies are appointed, it should not be for life.
Yes, I think that's a good point. I don't believe in life-held offices although institutional traditions vary in the States, as we know, in the U.S., Supreme Court justices are appointed for life.
Yes, but we can very clearly see there how that impacts how justice is served.
Exactly. I do believe there is a case can be made strongly for terms of office, which would there be certain limits so that there be some renewal. I think that is a fair point, and I think it ought to be considered for both Attorney General, the Auditor General, and so on. So we need a different kind of governance system. And now I think the government is thinking of splitting the role of Attorney General in two, Director of Public Prosecutions, as well as the legal advisor to the government, which is in line with most of what's going on in Europe.
They've been talking about that for a long, long time. We don't see any movement on it, do we?
Yeah. We don't see. The government promised to do something. It was in Mr. Christodoulidis' pre-election campaign. I've seen moves in that direction, but nothing concrete yet. I think it will happen eventually. That's what the EU is telling Cyprus. That's what all political parties agree to this. It will. But as many other things in Cyprus, it takes time.
Well, that's an understatement if ever I heard one. A final word from you about where you think we go from here. I mean, I think that we could say citizens as a whole feel let down.
I think so. I think that's a fair statement. 80% of the people we know from polls support strongly, not just support, but very enthusiastic about Mr. Michailidis. They're dismissive of his dismissal, if you like. So clearly public opinion realizes that something important took place, and they're dispirited, and I think this is going to increase mistrust in public institutions. In my view, this is one of the biggest problems of the country, institutional mistrust. And if you have that, then clearly you can have lots of problems if people do not trust the institutions that govern their lives. So that's one thing. I'm afraid this is not good news. The second bit, which might be better news, is Mr. Michailidis, I guess, with all this political capital he has accumulated, he has earned, he will probably enter politics in 2028. I doubt he will establish a political party or anything, but if I were to make a prediction, I think he would probably run for president. And if so, that might be the possibility of seeing new things developing politically, institutionally in the island.
Well, if that's the case, I guess we have to pray that he doesn't have the same, could I say, illness that so many other of our politicians have, that things change dramatically once they get in the presidential chair.
True, it's true. The good thing about Mr. Michailidis, we have seen this for 10 years, is that he's a man of convictions. So he believes in something, he pursues it, and I think it's that kind of, I don't like the analogy, but it's like this the kind of a Thatcherite trait, if you like. Mrs. Thatcher was notorious for her obstinacy, for her convictions, and so on. We need that kind of people who are in charge of institutions as well as in politics, particularly in politics, to have certain convictions and to have the courage to act on them. He appears to be one of them. But of course, as you pointed out, you never know. Power has this
ability to corrupt.
Yeah, well, if not so, at least to transform people. Ever since Shakespeare, we have known this. And we can only hope that those who come to office with good credentials, they will still retain them and they will still act on them.
We can indeed hope, I guess, Haridimos. Thank you very much indeed for your time. And do keep us informed if you come across any other little snippets of news that you think follow this up, because I don't think it's going to go away very soon.
Yes, I doubt it too. Yeah, thank you.
That is Professor Haridimos Tsoukas from the University of Cyprus. President Christodoulidis lost no time in appointing a new Auditor General. On Wednesday, Andreas Papakonstantinou was sworn in at the presidential palace. He stressed the importance of his office's independence, bravery and voice. He underscored that the Audit Office should have access to all necessary documents without hindrance, and he specified that he had met with former Auditor General Odysseas Michailidis, who guided him to find his footing. He also expressed concerns over limited access to data for the Audit Office, which has been well documented in the latest Rule of Law report by the European Union Commission, which expressed its concern over the trend and the impact this was having. The new Auditor General agreed that the very capable staff of the Audit Office should be utilised and collaborations should be developed. He said it takes bravery to achieve a proper audit, but it also requires the subject to accept the findings for the benefit of society.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Next Saturday, the Nicosia Dog Shelter is organising a Dog's Day Out. What does it involve? Well, we're joined by Mora Hadji Yakovu to tell us all about it. Mora, I think this is something you're hoping a lot of people will join you on, even if I think they don't have a dog. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. It's a fun day out for all the family. They can come with or without their pets. We will have dogs there that are available for adoption. They will also be there so people can socialize with them and see how much love that these animals have to give us. So we will explain to people how the Nicosia Dog Shelter works. If they are interested in coming to help us and volunteer at the shelter, or just come visit the shelter for a fun day out with their kids and walk some dogs.
And when you say a dog's day out and they're going for a run, how far are people going to run with them?
It's basically, they can take the dogs out around the area for a walk. They can just play around the area because we'll have other entertainment there as well. There will be handmade crafts, books for kids, and all the proceeds will be for the Nicosia Dog Shelter. So there will be lots of activities in the area.
So it's a fun day out for all the family, you say. What time is it going to start?
It's going to be starting from 3 until 7 p.m. and there will be a live link from Love FM from 4 to 6.
Now, I know you've got a website. Can people go on there and find more details? Perhaps a lot of people don't know what exactly the shelter does in terms of, for example, how many dogs have you got there at the moment?
Currently, we have about 80 dogs available for adoption. This number varies every month according to how many dogs are reserved or adopted during the time period and how many new dogs come in. We have different sites that people can log on to. We have the Nicosia Dog Shelter Facebook page. We also have the Nicosia Rehoming Dog page. And we also have an Instagram page. So people can message any one of these pages. There's always somebody there willing to reply, where they can get details. And if they want to come, they can make an appointment to come visit the shelter at any of the times that the volunteers are available to be with them.
And I know you do need volunteers as well, don't you, on a regular basis to clean out the cages, walk the dogs, give them a bit of love.
Yes, actually, we do need volunteers, as many as we can get, exactly to help walk the dogs, especially socialize with the dogs. We have this year a lot of puppies at the moment at the dog shelter, and we like to encourage kids to come so they can play with them, socialize with them, which is great to show love to the dogs, but it's also great for the kids to see how much love they can get back in return.
Absolutely. And the main thing we should emphasise, I think, is that if you take on a dog, it is for life.
Yes. This is something we always explain to people when they come. A dog is a minimum of a 10-year, 15-year commitment. It's part of the family. If you're going to have a dog you need to realize that it has to be part of the family. It adapts to your lifestyle, but it really is a full-time commitment. We also try to advise people that there are so many dogs now in shelters looking for homes, beautiful dogs which really have so much love to give. So we're trying to also encourage people to, before they make a decision on buying a pet, please visit a local shelter and see what's available there before they do.
And particularly some of the dogs in the shelters have not been treated well. There are, as you say, so many in the shelters desperate for a loving home. I hope you get lots of people down there on the 12th, and it's at the Papafilippou Luna Park in Makedonidis in Nicosia, starting at 3, running till 7 p.m. Mora Haji Yakovu from the Nicosia Dog Shelter, many thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for your time also.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.